Welcome back once again, friends. We have been learning about the print statement in Python. We saw what are the different escape characters we could use. We learned about the sep and end. Uh, we learned about the input. Let's try to put it all together to have some fun with this print, right? Now think of it this way that as I told you at the beginning, there's a convention that everybody prints hello world to sort of start learning a language. Let's do a little bit more. Let's create art with letters using print statements. So what do I mean by that? I want to create some kind of an art which is basically letters writing themselves, right? So what I mean is like we write a P, a big P using letter P, a big Y using letter Y's, and so on and so forth, right? So I'm going to write something like this. Now, before I go there, I'll just tell you the sort of the formula that I'm going to use here. I'm going to use bunch of print statements to print something like this. But notice that each of these big letters has been created as a 5 cross 5 grid, right? So which means I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 boxes here, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 boxes here as well. So there's 25 sort of pixels in this, you can, if you will, and in each pixel I decide whether it's empty or whether a letter is written here. So for P I'm going to write a P, for Y I'm going to write Y in the letters I want, and so on and so forth. Of course, you can imagine that you can even write some other letters here. You don't have to write, let's say, the same. You can in fact use some characters here to kind of display this art and so on and so forth. But I'm going to use this method, right? So let's go back to the project that we had been doing and see how we can do this and how it's actually really not that hard, right? So what I'm going to do, remember this is what we had been doing earlier. So I take my name, I say, print a few things here. I say I enjoy this. I'm going to give an empty print statement sort of just to create an empty line for me. And then I'll write some, say one more print statement, something interesting, let's say. And again, I won't give any, let's say any end character. So that gives me an empty print statement. Right now, notice I told you I'm going to be writing my letters in a 5 cross 5 grid. So to do that, I'm just going to write, let's say, this, you know so I know the first line has got, so first row here that I'm writing is this row here. So it's got all 5 P's, Y, 3 gaps, Y, 5 T's, H, 3 gaps, H, all N's, and all O's, and then N, right? So let's do that a little bit slowly, a little bit carefully. So I'm going to say Y and Y. So I have to just make sure there are, so 1, 2, 3, 4, and then Y here. Next, I go and write the T, 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 T. Next, I go and write H, 1, 2, 3, and then 1 H here. Then I write an O, so O, O, O. And then I write an N, once again N. Again, I have to be careful to make sure I write all the, and then let's say an N, right? And just for the sake of, let's say completion, and also to create a little bit compact, let's say representation, I write sep of, say, a empty character, right? So which means that I'm going to get these letters very close to each other. So let's just see this particular statement to see what goes on here. So I write my name here, right? And I now notice I'm writing Python. So I've got the first row of this, done. So which is basically this row has got done. Now I'm going to write the second row and then the third row and so on. So for the second row, I've got 3 gaps here. Y, I've got a gap, Y gap, Y gap, and so on and so forth. So I'm just going to write that here. I'm going to just take this entire statement. See, and here notice P, I don't need these 3, but I must make sure that I give 3 spaces, because remember I want this guy to appear exactly like a 5, the gap should be maintained, so I must give 3 spaces here. Over here I give a space, and again I must make sure that this thing aligns nicely, right? So that's important. Now T, I do not have anything here, so I'm going to remove these two as well, but I must give back those pieces. If I don't give the spaces, it's all going to be messed up. H is just fine. O, in fact, I don't need these 3, but I will give a gap nonetheless. N, I'm going to write an extra N here, but now notice again this is becoming too wide, so I'm going to remove 1 space from here, because remember I must make sure that there are only 5 elements in this, because I'm going to write this as a 5 cross 5, and then I can keep doing this a little bit carefully. So if I come back here, let's say Control V, and I'm going to just write this 5 times, because totally I'm going to have 5 statements, and it becomes simple because you can see the entire picture appearing right here, right? So it's going to be P. Over here I don't need, so okay, let me just do line by line. So I don't need this Y, but I do need this Y, and I'm going to align this. Notice I'm aligning these things quite nicely. T is already done. H, I'm going to require 1, 2, 3. So this H, O seems perfectly fine. N, I'm going to just say, okay, let's, how did I write N in this? Let me just go and check. I wrote an N. Okay, so I wrote an N. I don't need the center guy. In fact, I'm going to use this N here, right? But again, I go and align this thing. So this alignment is important. So that's third row. Fourth row doesn't have this thing here, doesn't have this thing here. So fifth row, I've done fourth and fifth row. In fact, I can go and do the same for the Y. But again, notice my alignment has gone off here, right? Y is longer here. That is going to mess it up. So make sure it gets aligned once again. And in fact, T is also taken care of. H is also taken care of. O is okay. Uh, for the N, I'm going to write. So how did I write N? N is a little bit tricky because of this. Okay, N, I wrote an extra, not a space here, but an N here. But again, make sure this nicely aligned, and I can remove this guy, right? So uh, I think this is all complete. So O, right? And here, and notice, yeah. So now one simple test here is that when you look at your code, right, you should, because we have aligned it perfectly, notice there are 5 elements inside and 5 rows of printing. When you look at this code, you're going to see exactly the letters that you're going to see, right? Now, if this looks a little bit jagged, then it's going to also appear jagged in the screen. And that will happen primarily because in case the alignments of letters are going off when you are removing spaces and so on and so forth, right? So if I look at this now, what happens is I get, let's say I print my name, and I get this Python, but notice this Python is appearing really, really cramped. So I can fix that by just changing the sep on each one of these. So I go and change the sep, for example, to, let's say, this, and then my Python is going to appear quite neat, right? So I can say my name is Vineet, and it says, it prints quite nicely, this Python. In fact, I could do, let's say, I could put some others, so I can put, let's say, exclamation mark between these, one exclamation mark, and that will also look nice, I think, though a little bit cramped, but you get the idea, right? I can control how my Python appears in this, so I say we need, and notice I got Python, right? So this is fine. Now let's say I want to write something like Python is so cool. So remember, if I did not give any end, then basically end is a new line. So I will give an end. I'll just remove this space so that it looks a little bit less cluttered. I was just trying to demonstrate to you the sep statement. uh, I'll give myself, let's say end equals to, and I just give myself, let's say, an extra space here, right? So what happens here is that now that I'm giving an end, it means that I will not generate a new line over here. So when I go and print, let's say in the next statement, say I go and print, let's say, is so cool, right? So remember, there's no new line created over here, so which means I expect this statement to appear right as a continuation of Python, right? Now this has become very cramped. So one thing you can do is that in the settings, you can go and say layout, you can say stack. So what will happen is that the code comes on top and you have ample space to sort of demonstrate whatever you're doing, right? So let's just see this now. Remember, the code is still here. It's just up and down. So notice it's written like this with the end statement here. So when I run this, now what happens, I give my name, but I get something like Python is so cool, right? In fact, I could give a little bit more space if I wanted to. It'll look even better probably. And now if I did this, notice I will get a nice, there's a Python here. Python is so cool, right? Now, one thing that comes up is that why did I need to do end here? Because I could have also written here for this particular, let's say statement, I could have written, is so cool as a comma here, but there are two problems, right? One is that I'm using a sep here. Remember, the sep is going to apply to all of this, right? So if I wrote it that way, I'm going to end up with an extra space over here, which doesn't look nice. So end, that sense helps. Also, if you want, you can do even more fancy things. For example, you can write something like \v as your end. And in which case, what will happen is that this is so cool is going to appear at a little bit, basically the next line, right? So if I did this, notice it appears Python is so cool, right? And it really is cool because you can imagine that this is just an illustration. You can write pretty much anything this way. You can choose to use different characters here. You can choose to take the player's name and write something. You can choose to write your own name. You can write anything that you wish to. In fact, you can make it quite interactive using Just this very simple idea, right? So I hope this is sort of our answer to hello world. Everybody does hello world, so we've done something different. I hope this gave you, a good idea about what print statement is, how it works, how we can do a lot of things with print. Yeah, take care. Thank you so much. Bye bye.